So this just happened. After years of just me and Dylan, my son, navigating life after losing his mom, I thought I was finally ready to bring some stability back into our home. I met Laura, and from the start she was this whirlwind of warmth and kindness. She just seemed to get Dylan. He was 17 then, still reeling from losing his mom, and she stepped in, not as a replacement but as a gentle presence. It felt like a miracle, honestly. The house got brighter, softer. We started having family dinners again, real ones, not just me and Dylan staring at our plates. She'd help Dylan with his college applications, proofread his essays, small things that meant the world. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what peace feels like. But there were these little moments, tiny cracks in the perfect picture I was painting in my head. Dylan, who could be so withdrawn sometimes, seemed to glow a little brighter around Laura. She'd tell him stories, and he'd just sit there watching her, his gaze lingering a beat too long. I'd catch them laughing together after I'd retreated upstairs to read, a secret conspiratorial laughter that made me pause. When I'd ask about it, they'd both just say nothing, their eyes a little too wide, a little too quick to turn away. And her hugs goodnight, they started to feel different. Not a quick peck on the cheek, but a lingering embrace, her hands resting on his back a moment too long. I'd brush it off. They were bonding. It was healthy. He needed that. I wanted it to be healthy, but a little voice, a quiet hum beneath the surface, kept nudging. It was the way she'd look at him when she thought I wasn't watching, a look that held something more than just affection for my child. It was a shared secret, a connection that felt a little too deep, a little too personal. I told myself I was imagining things, that grief played tricks on the mind, that I was just happy to have found someone, to have found this peace, and I wasn't going to let my own insecurities ruin it. Now, real quick before we move on, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories just like this. Now let's keep going. So I was supposed to be at a staff dinner, a mandatory networking thing that always felt like a drag. But by 9 o'clock, my head was pounding. The fluorescent lights of the conference room felt like tiny daggers, and all I wanted was my own bed. I drove home, the quiet streets a balm on my raw nerves. The house was quiet, which was normal on a Tuesday night. Laura and Dylan were likely doing their usual evening routine. I walked past Dylan's room, just intending to duck into mine and collapse. His door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway, and I saw her. Laura was in there, sitting on the edge of his bed. She was massaging his thighs. It wasn't blatant, nothing was exposed. But the way she was doing it, the slow, deliberate strokes, the intense focus on her face, the casual intimacy of it all, it hit me like a physical blow. The air in the hallway suddenly felt thick, charged with an unspeakable tension. I found myself holding my breath, unable to move, unable to process. Then, as if sensing my presence, she looked up. Her eyes met mine through the gap in the door, and for a split second I saw a flash of something I couldn't name. Fear. Guilt. She jumped, pulling her hands away as if burned. Dylan, startled, sat up straighter on the bed, a flush creeping up his neck. "Dad," he stammered, sounding genuinely surprised. Laura recovered quickly, her voice a little too bright, a little too firm. "Oh, hi, honey. Dylan pulled something at the gym today, just giving him a little massage to help with the soreness." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. It made perfect sense. Dylan was competitive, always pushing himself too hard. A pulled muscle, a bit of post-workout recovery. It was mundane. It was normal. I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like it was going to crack my face. "Right. Well, hope you feel better, son." And I walked into my room, closing the door with a click that sounded deafeningly loud in the silence that followed. But sleep didn't come. I lay there in the dark, the image of her hands on his legs replaying on an endless loop. The tension, the unspoken atmosphere, it felt like a betrayal. Something inside me, a deep primal instinct, was screaming that I had missed something. Something important. Something terrible. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to articulate it, or even if I should. That next morning was a blur. I remember making coffee, feeling a hollowness in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. I was supposed to be working from home that day, avoiding the office drama. I was upstairs, needing to wash my hands, and walked into the guest bathroom, the one at the end of the hall. That's where I forgot my phone. As I pushed the door open, a sound stopped me dead in my tracks. It was water running, but not just that. There was a low, rhythmic gasping, laced with a sound I recognized, yet it was alien in this context. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze in the doorway, a cold dread creeping up my spine. The shower curtain, a pale blue floral pattern, was only half open, and through that gap I saw it. It was unmistakable. Laura was on her knees in front of Dylan, directly under the stream of hot water. His hands were tangled in her hair, his head tilted back. I saw him thrust into her, his body rigid with effort. Then a choked cry, a gasp I'll never forget. I saw him release, a torrent of something hot and white splashing across her face, her eyes. She blinked, the water washing over her, and then her eyes found mine, still fixed on her through the sliver of the shower curtain. She was still holding him, her posture one of absolute, unquestioning acceptance. I couldn't speak. My lungs felt like they were collapsing. I couldn't breathe. I just backed away slowly, my feet making no sound on the carpet. The door creaked shut behind me with a soft groan, but it sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence of my mind. He didn't come out of the bathroom. She didn't try to explain. I just remember standing at the top of the stairs, the damp air from the shower still clinging to the hallway, and knowing I wouldn't be going back upstairs that night. I couldn't face them. I couldn't face myself. The days that followed were a tightrope walk of denial and dreadful awareness. I avoided the upstairs, particularly the guest bathroom. Laura was her usual composed self, but there was a new wariness in her eyes when she looked at me. Dylan was quieter than ever, his gaze often fixed on some distant point, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. I kept telling myself I'd misread it, that my imagination had run wild. Then one afternoon, Laura went for a bath. I was in the living room pretending to read a book, but my mind was anything but calm. Her phone, a sleek silver model, lay on the coffee table face up. A notification popped up. Then another, and another. They were all from Dee. My hand, almost of its own volition, reached for the phone. I know I shouldn't have. The screen unlocked easily. Her personal messages were usually locked tight. But curiosity, sharp and poisonous, had taken over. I tapped on the most recent string of messages from Dee. My blood ran cold reading them. She was responding to something he'd said, something about his stamina. Her reply was chilling. "I'm so glad your young body can go again after last night. It feels even better without protection, doesn't it?" I felt a sickening lurch in my gut. Protection? Last night, I scrolled up, my fingers fumbling. She was telling him how she couldn't wait for him to be there every morning when I left for work, how she fantasized about him. And then I saw it, a short video clip attached to a message from him. It was blurry, taken from a low angle, but it was horrifyingly clear. Laura was on our couch, our nice velvet couch, straddling Dylan. She was giggling, her voice muffled but audible. "Don't worry," she said. "Your dad doesn't come home until 6. The world tilted. The book slipped from my numb fingers and landed with a thud on the carpet. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a momentary lapse. This was deliberate. This was planned. And I, oblivious, had been the oblivious fool, the obstacle being casually mentioned in their whispered transgressions. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, the weight of it crushing. The bleach smell from the bathroom floor upstairs felt like it was seeping through the walls. After seeing those messages, seeing that video, I knew I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. The shock had numbed me, but a cold, simmering rage was starting to take its place. I needed proof, undeniable proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that this reality was as twisted as it felt. I needed to know the extent of it. The next morning, I told Laura I had an early meeting an hour away, a lie I'd rehearsed in my head. I kissed her goodbye, the touch of her lips feeling like ash on my skin. I walked out the front door and got into my car. But instead of driving away, I parked on the quiet street. Then I just sat there in the garage, the engine off, the door closed. I wanted to be close to hear, to see. I waited. 15 minutes ticked by. The silence of the house was amplified by the stillness of the garage. Then, through the ventilation shaft, I heard it. Her voice. It was distorted by the metal and the distance, but no less clear in its meaning. He still doesn't suspect. Then Dylan's laugh, that familiar boyish laugh now laced with a chilling arrogance. Nope, he's clueless. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. I could only listen. Laura's voice, laced with a desire that made my stomach churn, continued. Good. I like waking up with you inside me. There was a pause. Then Dylan's voice, deeper now, laced with a possessiveness that was utterly alien. I love how tight you are compared to girls my age. My world imploded again. He was comparing, praising, deeming her superior. Every part of me wanted to shatter the silence. To scream, to rage, to confront them with the horrifying reality of their words. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I fumbled for the small notebook I always kept in my glove compartment. My hand shook violently as I uncapped my pen. I started to write, every word, every syllable, every disgusting confession. I wrote until my hand ached, until the ink ran dry. I wrote it all down just so I'd know for sure, just so I'd have the proof that I wasn't insane, that this was real, and that I had to do something, no matter how impossible it seemed. After that morning in the garage, something shifted. It wasn't just in them, it was in me. I was no longer the man who could dismiss glances or brush off hurried explanations. I saw everything through a new, shattered lens. And they, oblivious or perhaps emboldened by my perceived ignorance, began to change too. Dylan started walking around the house with a new arrogance. There was a smirk that sometimes played on his lips when he looked at me, a look that seemed to say he pitied me, that he possessed some secret knowledge, some power that I lacked. He'd catch my eye and hold it, a quiet challenge in his gaze. It felt like he was enjoying this clandestine world he'd built with my wife. Laura's behavior was subtler, but no less devastating. She started touching Dylan's back more often, a casual, possessive stroke as they passed each other in the hall, right in front of me. She'd laugh at his jokes with a little too much enthusiasm, her eyes sparkling in a way they hadn't for me in years. The clothes she wore, which had once suited my eye, now seemed to emphasize a certain boldness, tighter fits, lower necklines. I'd find myself staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman I married with the one who was now so openly, so brazenly connected to my son. The most jarring change was in the language they used, not so much to each other but to me. She stopped calling me babe or honey. It was always my name, spoken neutrally or sometimes a clipped dear. And then one evening, as she was leaving for a late yoga class, she casually said to Dylan, "See you later, sweetheart, sweetheart." The word landed like a physical blow. It was a term of endearment that felt like it belonged to a lover, not a stepson. I finally worked up the courage to confront her, or rather, to probe. "Laura," I asked one night, my voice trembling slightly as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, the untouched food growing cold. Are you happy? With us? With me?" She pushed her plate away, a sigh escaping her lips. "I'm just tired, John," she said, her tone dismissive. "This phase, I don't know, maybe it's early menopause kicking in." She offered a weak, unconvincing smile, but I knew. I heard the soft sounds from their rooms at night. I felt the distance between us like a chasm. Her explanation was a flimsy excuse, a curtain of denial pulled tightly over the ugly truth. I was caught in a suffocating cycle of suspicion and feigned normalcy. Every interaction with Laura or Dylan was now a minefield. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a stage for their illicit drama, and I was the unwitting audience. I'd convinced myself I had to maintain a facade of normalcy, for my own sanity, for Dylan's sake. But the weight of it was becoming unbearable. Then came a Thursday. Laura announced she had a work retreat that was unavoidable, a conference requiring her to be out of town until Sunday. She packed a small overnight bag, kissed me goodbye with a practiced, distant peck, and left. I watched her car pull away, a wave of relief washing over me, swiftly followed by a crushing loneliness. Later that evening, as cliché as it sounds, I was tidying up the living room, putting away stray magazines and straightening cushions. Her purse, a large leather tote that always seemed to overflow with her belongings, was draped over the back of an armchair. A small, folded receipt had fallen out from one of the side pockets. Annoyance flickered, then curiosity gnawed at me. It was from a hotel, the Whispering Oaks Inn downtown. I unfolded it. The date was for that very Thursday. And underneath the room number 216, it clearly stated, 2 guests, 1 king bed. My heart began to pound. I glanced at my phone. Dylan had told me just yesterday that he was going to a friend's cabin for the weekend, a spontaneous trip. He'd seemed a little too eager to get out of the house. Now, holding this receipt, the pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The couch, I noticed then, still had that twisted blanket from when Laura had been napping earlier that day. A faint, unfamiliar perfume lingered in the air near the armchair, not Laura's usual scent. I pressed the receipt to my forehead, the crisp paper feeling strangely heavy. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold it steady. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shatter something, but the damage was done. The betrayal was confirmed, etched in black ink on a flimsy piece of paper. Still, I said nothing. How could I? How do you even begin to speak a pain so profound, so utterly shattering? The following Saturday was a beautiful, crisp autumn day, the kind of day that felt like a mocking contrast to the turmoil inside me. I'd been restless, unable to shake the image of that hotel receipt, the implied intimacy of a king-sized bed occupied by 2 guests. This time, I saw Laura heading out for a walk. I knew, with a dreadful certainty, where she was going. His car, Dylan's beat-up sedan, was already parked at the trailhead for the local nature preserve, a place we used to hike as a family, a place filled with ghosts of happier times. I got into my own car, keeping a safe distance, and followed. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken expectations. I watched from behind the trees as they met. They didn't wait for privacy. They walked side by side, their hands clasped. It was casual, natural, the kind of gesture between 2 people deeply in love. He leaned his head against her shoulder, and she whispered something in his ear, her hand stroking his arm. Then he playfully spanked her, a light, affectionate swat on her backside, and she giggled. Giggled, right there in the dappled sunlight on the path where we'd once walked hand in hand. My hands trembled as I raised my phone, snapping photos. The images felt grainy, unreal, a detached record of the impossible. But the worst part wasn't the visual evidence, as damning as it was. It was the look she gave him, a look of pure adoration, of deep, unwavering love. It was the look I had craved for years, the look I had never received, not even in the height of our affection. She was looking at my son as if he were her entire world. And in that moment, I understood that my place in her world and in Dylan's had been irrevocably erased. I was on an unexpected early return from an out-of-town client meeting. The traffic had been surprisingly light, and I decided to just get home rather than linger at a coffee shop. I let myself into the quiet house, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, casting long shadows. It was around 3 o'clock. The house creaked and settled, normal sounds that now seemed sinister. I walked into the master bedroom, intending to change out of my travel clothes. The door was slightly ajar. I heard sounds from the bathroom. Not the usual sounds of showering, but something more urgent, more rhythmic. A muffled groan, a hitch of breath. My blood ran cold. I pushed the door open a little wider. My breath caught in my throat. She was on top of him, riding him. I didn't need to see their faces clearly to know what was happening. The angle, the familiarity of their movements, the sheer desperation in the air. They didn't see me at first. He was arching his back, his body taut with pleasure, and then, with a guttural cry, he climaxed. His release seemed to overflow, a wave of heat radiating from him. Then she turned her head, mid-motion. Her eyes, wide and dark, locked with mine. She saw me and her expression didn't change. Not a flicker of surprise, not a hint of shock. It was a terrifying blankness. She leaned down, her lips brushing his ear, and whispered something inaudible to him. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. I couldn't stay. I couldn't breathe. I backed away, my hand reaching behind me, fumbling for the doorknob. I pulled it shut, the click echoing the finality of it all. I left the house without a word, without a sound. My hands were shaking so violently that I couldn't trust myself to drive. I sat on the curb, the rough concrete digging into my leg, and just listened to my own ragged breathing. 2 hours. I sat there for 2 hours waiting for something to break, but nothing did, except me. The dam finally broke. I couldn't keep holding it all in. The quiet, passive observer was gone, replaced by a man drowning in pain and betrayal. I confronted them, not with rage, but with a hollow weariness. Laura was the first to break. Tears streamed down her face, her hands clasped in front of her, a picture of desperate remorse. "It just happened," she sobbed, her voice choked with sobs. "We didn't mean for it to. It was a mistake. A mistake." The word felt like a cruel joke. Hundreds of mistakes, I thought. Thousands. Every shared glance, every lingering touch, every hushed conversation. I looked at her, my gaze steady, my voice a low monotone. "Laura," I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Do you love him?" Her silence was her answer. Her averted gaze, the way her shoulders slumped, the complete lack of any defense spoke volumes. It was a confession more damning than any words. Later that night, driven by a morbid need to understand the depth of this rot, I went through her belongings. In her bedside drawer, beneath a stack of old novels, I found it, a journal. It was bound in simple leather, its pages filled with her neat handwriting. I opened it, my hands shaking. It wasn't a diary of her daily life. It was filled with fantasies. Fantasies about Dylan. Detailed, explicit fantasies. And the dates, they went back years. Long before he was even 19. Long before I had married her. She hadn't just stumbled into this. She had been cultivating it, planning it, waiting for her moment. The realization was a final, crushing blow. The confrontation with Dylan was supposed to be the catharsis, the moment where I finally understood the why. I found him in his room, the door closed as usual. I didn't knock. I just walked in. He looked up from his phone, surprise etched on his face, quickly replaced by that familiar, defiant smirk. I sat on the edge of his bed, the springs groaning under my weight. "Why, Dylan?" I finally managed, my voice raw, barely a whisper. "Why would you do this to me, to us?" He didn't hesitate. He looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. "She was there for me when Mom died," he said, his voice flat. "You were too busy being strong, Dad. You were gone. She made me feel again. She made me feel alive." Alive. The word felt like a slap in the face. He saw my grief, my struggle to hold our lives together, as absence. He saw her comfort, her insidious seduction, as salvation. My voice cracked as I asked the next question, the one that still haunts my waking hours. Will it ever stop?" He looked at me, and that chilling smirk reappeared, wider this time. He laughed, a genuine, unrestrained laugh. "Do you want it too?" he asked, his eyes glinting with a perverse amusement. That laugh. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was the sound of something broken, something irrevocably lost. It was the sound of a son I no longer recognized, a son who had willingly stepped into a darkness I couldn't comprehend. My vision blurred. The wall behind him seemed to waver. A sob escaped me, a guttural, tearing sound. I'm not sure if I screamed, if I cried out in pain, or if I just let out a broken exhalation. All I know is that in that moment, with that laugh echoing in my ears, I stopped feeling real. I felt like a ghost in my own life. The journal entries and the hotel receipts were devastating, graphic proof. They confirmed the calculated nature of the betrayal. But there was a new kind of evidence, a more insidious kind, that I stumbled upon next. Laura had a habit of syncing her devices, wanting everything to be seamless. Her phone, her tablet, her laptop, all connected. And in that digital entanglement, I found her voice. I was going through her tablet, searching for anything that might further illuminate the timeline of her deception. I found a folder labeled D. Inside, a collection of audio files. My hands trembled as I clicked on the first one. Her voice, clear and intimate, filled the quiet room. "Your dad will never touch me like that again," she purred, the words dripping with a possessive satisfaction that made my skin crawl. "I love how your grip hurts a little after we've been together." Her voice was laced with a secret delight, a shared intimacy that was entirely foreign and deeply disturbing. I listened to another, and another. Each one was a dagger twisting deeper into my already gaping wounds. "Don't tell anyone about last night's kitchen thing, okay?" she asked in a hushed, conspiratorial tone. Then more confessions, more shared secrets that belonged to them, not to me. I didn't delete any of them, couldn't delete them. Instead, I copied them all onto a secure drive. I wanted to erase her voice from the world, to banish the sound of her betrayal from my own mind. But I couldn't. I listened to each clip, over and over again. The intimacy, the casual cruelty, the sheer audacity of it all. It was like a twisted therapy session, forcing me to confront the full horror of what had transpired. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that listening to those recordings had fundamentally altered me. I would never again be the man I was before. The evidence was overwhelming. The journal, the hotel receipts, the photographs, and now the voice notes. I had documented every layer of their deception. I had proof, but what was I going to do with it? Revenge was a concept that flickered, but it felt too hollow, too small for the enormity of the pain I felt. I wanted justice, but in my own way. I decided on a slow, deliberate dismantling. I printed everything. The journal pages were scanned and printed, the incriminating texts laid out in stark clarity, the photographs enlarged to their full, devastating impact. I even managed to get digital copies of some of the most damning voice notes onto a USB drive. Then I made copies, one set for my divorce lawyer, of course, but the others, they were sent to places that would make Laura truly understand the consequences of her actions. I didn't send them to her friends or family. That felt too personal, too petty. Instead, I addressed them to her professional life, the HR department of her company, the CEO, her direct female manager, whose professionalism Laura had always seemed to admire. I wanted her reputation, the impeccable image she cultivated, to be the first thing to crumble. The final act was almost anticlimactic, yet intensely satisfying. The next morning, I placed the divorce papers on the kitchen table, right beside her usual cup of coffee. When she saw them, her eyes widened in disbelief, then horror. The look on her face, a mixture of shock, rage, and dawning realization, was something I'll never forget. I recorded it with my phone, not out of malice, but as a testament. Without a word, I watched her sob, her carefully constructed world imploding. I stayed silent, a statue of quiet devastation. Then I began to pack. Slowly, meticulously, I gathered every sock, every charger, every framed picture. Each item was a relic of a life that had been shattered. The house emptied, object by object, memory by memory. The air growing lighter, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. It was a quiet, deliberate, final departure. The day of the move arrived with an almost surreal calm. The movers were efficient, silent professionals dismantling the life Laura and I had built, and the earlier life Dylan and I had shared. He showed up not to help rebuild, but to help dismantle. He was quiet, his usual nervous energy replaced by a sullen detachment. He carried boxes, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor. It felt fitting, in a twisted way, that he was now helping to pack away the remnants of his father's failed marriage. As we stood in the empty living room, the echo of our footsteps the only sound, I couldn't bear the silence anymore. It was a silence pregnant with unspoken accusations, with a lifetime of damaged trust. "Dylan," I started, my voice raspy, "do you regret it?" He didn't answer. He just continued to stack a box of my old books onto a dolly, his back to me. He rubbed the back of his neck, a familiar gesture that usually meant unease but now felt like a shield. I pressed on, the words pushing their way out, laced with the pain of years. "I raised you. I was there for you." Still nothing. He just kept working, his movements mechanical. We both knew in that suffocating silence that there wasn't anything left worth saving. The father-son bond, the foundation of our family, had been eroded, replaced by something alien and irreparable. We were strangers in a shared history, two figures adrift in the wreckage of a betrayal that had consumed us both. The new apartment smells like bleach, a sterile, chemical scent that hangs heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the faint scent of old books and coffee that used to fill my old home. It's a clean smell, but it doesn't feel clean. It feels like an attempt to scrub away something that's already seeped into the bone. Every morning, I wake up with a jolt, expecting to hear her laugh in the kitchen, to see the warm glow of the morning light on her hair as she made coffee. The sound of the refrigerator humming feels like a phantom echo of her presence. Every glass in the cupboard looks like hers, every mug the one she always reached for. The images are relentless. I keep seeing her on her knees, water running, a horrifying tableau in the guest shower. I keep seeing his eyes, filled with a certainty that was never meant for me, a confidence born from a forbidden union. I wonder if I'll ever feel like a whole man again, if the pieces that shattered will ever truly fit back together, or if I'll forever be a mosaic of broken shards. I wonder if this entire ordeal, this devastating betrayal, was always going to happen. Was it something I missed, something I invited, or just an inevitable rot that took hold? And then there's the deepest ache, the one that gnaws at the core of my being. I wonder what my first wife would think of all this. Would she be heartbroken, disgusted, or would she simply see the signs I missed? I wonder, did I ever really know either of them? Were they ever truly the women I thought I loved, or just carefully constructed illusions? The bleach smell offers no answers, just a constant reminder of what's been lost. The legal consultations are a blur of dry paperwork and solemn pronouncements. My lawyer, a stern woman with kind eyes, walks me through the divorce proceedings. She uses words like irreconcilable differences and equitable distribution. They feel like hollow euphemisms for the gutting I've endured. I sign papers, my hands shaking, each stroke of the pen a definitive mark on the end of the life I thought I had. Laura, through her own legal counsel, is surprisingly quiet. There are no demands, no attempts at reconciliation. It's as if the confessions and the evidence have stripped her of any fight, leaving her hollowed out, resigned. We agree to divide assets, to liquidate the shared investments. The house is to be sold. She wants nothing, she claims, just to disappear, as if erasing herself from our shared physical space will erase what she did. Dylan, meanwhile, has barely spoken to me. He's moved back into his old room at his aunt. a silent exile. He's registered at a different community college, a fresh start, I suppose. But the weight of what happened feels like it's settled onto his young shoulders. He carries it like a shroud. I see him with his friends sometimes, walking down the street, and he averts his gaze, a ghost passing through his own life. He's living with the consequences, but whether he understands them or if they'll change him for the better remains to be seen. I can only hope that time and distance will heal the rawest wounds, but the scars, I know, will remain. The house sits empty now, a monument to a life that imploded. I stand in the driveway, keys to the new apartment heavy in my pocket, and look at it one last time. The windows are dark, the lawn starting to look neglected. It's ironic, isn't it? This place that was supposed to be our haven, our future, now just stands as a testament to its undoing. I'd driven by a few times since the final walkthrough. Each time, that sterile bleach smell from my new apartment seemed to cling to me, a constant reminder of the fresh start that felt more like a fresh wound. The movers had cleared out the last of Laura's belongings. She had been quick to divest herself of any tangible connection to this life, a life she had so thoroughly trashed. Dylan's things are mostly gone too. He'd taken his textbooks, his gaming consoles, his clothes. He forgot a framed photo of us from years ago, a younger, smiling version of Dylan next to a proud, hopeful me. I found it tucked away at the back of a closet, almost as if he'd deliberately left it behind. Or perhaps, in his own way, he was already distancing himself from that past, from that father he no longer seemed to recognize. I remember sitting on the curb outside this house for hours after I'd first discovered proof. The concrete had been cold, unforgiving. Now the driveway feels the same. There's no anger left, no rage, just a profound, quiet sadness. A realization that some betrayals don't offer a dramatic climax or a satisfying resolution. They simply leave you standing in the rubble, wondering how you'll ever rebuild. It's been over a year since I left that life behind. The bleach smell in my apartment has faded, replaced by the faint scent of old paper and the lingering aroma of lonely microwave meals. The sharp edges of the initial shock have softened, but the ache remains, a dull throb beneath the surface of my days. I've established a routine. Work, gym, quiet evenings. I avoid social gatherings. The thought of explaining, of reliving the narrative is too exhausting. I see Dylan occasionally. Our encounters are brief, heavily punctuated by silences. He's spoken a few words about his college studies, his plans for the future. He seems to be navigating his life, building something new, but the chasm between us is still vast and uncrossable. He's a stranger who shares my blood, a constant, painful reminder of what was lost. Laura has vanished. I've heard nothing, seen nothing. She's a ghost in my memory, a character in a story that ended abruptly. I sometimes wonder what she's doing, if she's found another family to disrupt, another naive man to ensnare. The thought is cold, clinical. I find myself replaying moments, searching for clues I missed, for the exact point where everything went wrong. Was it my grief after my first wife's death that made me vulnerable? Was it Laura's calculated charm? Or was it Dylan's own burgeoning desires, finding fertile ground in a landscape of loss? The questions don't have easy answers. They coil and uncoil in my mind, leaving me with a profound uncertainty. I look at old photos of my first wife, her gentle smile, and I wonder if she ever suspected. Did she see something in my eyes, some vulnerability, that foreshadowed this entire devastating saga? I was so focused on building a new family, on protecting